Welcome back to the 40% Better podcast, where we talk about all things leadership, mostly in the technology world, because that's where I'm from. Jimmy has graciously volunteered to join us today, accepted our invitation, and he's in beautiful sunny Mexico. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Really nice to be here. And yeah, the sun is shining, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous. Well, actually, I shouldn't be, because the sun is shining out here also. Only it's in the 60s, I think.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'd like it to be 10 degrees warmer would be awesome, so I can go run around outside, but whatever, I'll bear my cross. So talking about leadership, we're very not scripted, except I have one question that I always start with, which is, how did you get started in leadership, like across the course of your life?
Deep, deep and distant past question there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose one of the mantras that we teach is leadership is a mindset, not a job title. And so you can be a leader in any environment, whether you're part of a church community, a sports team, a club, a society, or in the workplace. And when I was much younger, one of the things we had to do in school was Army cadets, which is essentially kind of like ROTC but for kids. And the intention was to teach self-reliance and discipline and values. But one of the most important things, obviously, that you learned along the way was leadership. So, you moved up the ranks from being a basic cadet through a sort of cadet corporal, cadet sergeant, and so on. And at each layer of that experience, you were given a little bit of training and you were given a little bit of exposure to leading other people. So I suppose that, if I was to go way back through my life, that was probably the first instance where leadership was a word that I heard that was something that I thought, this is quite interesting. I could get into this. And, if you fast forward through all of my career, those early formative days are still some of the lessons that I use now, 40 plus years later.
I like that. When back then, dredging up memories from the past, I'm sorry. What did you conceive leadership to mean back then, and has it changed over time?
Yeah, I think, when you're a child, things are much more black and white. So I think what I would call the power-based model of leadership was probably my initial understanding. I'm in charge, therefore you do what I say. And we're in a military context right now. And I think a lot of people misjudge military context or military leadership context to be dictatorial or authoritative. And it actually isn't. It's very much a collaborative model between the officers and the senior non-commissioned officers who will plan and organize things behind the scenes before they come out and do the big presentation of the orders to the boys and girls who are going to go and do the work. And so I didn't understand that when I first started out. I thought, once you get this stripe on your arm, that made you a little bit more important, and that allowed you to tell people what to do, and they had to do it. Again, you fast forward even probably 5 years from that point, I found myself in the most senior cadet in sort of the region for my part of the country, and I realized pretty quickly that just telling people what to do didn't work, because they were missing home, or they had fallen over and hurt their leg that morning, or any number of things, any number of personal circumstances might have happened. Also, they might just not like you or the thing you were saying. And so I learned as a cadet sergeant major to understand and ask people, well, what's going on for you, and how do we help you to move through this moment so you can do what I need you to do. So it's all about, if I coin the phrase I use now, it's about friction removal, but essentially taking away the things that are stopping people doing what you want them to do, or that they know is important to do because they're distracted by something else. And again, if I go through my career as a manager and a leader and then a general manager, a lot of the work that is done trying to get people to do things is actually understanding what's stopping them doing it in the first place, and getting them to a point where they feel comfortable with what you're asking them to do, that it isn't something that they don't understand it, that they don't like it, or that they don't like you. You've got to work through those three barriers or change barriers um, to now enable them to come on board.
I like that. I maybe the whole theme of this whole podcast is going to be friction removal. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
because that's it totally resonates with me, and that's one of the things that um I when I first started running software teams, that's one of the things that I really focused on because uh, um when I started running I got crazy lucky with my first hires. Um, and they were all better at coding than I was.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I'm like, how do I make it as easy as possible for them to be amazing at coding? And um, what's all the friction I can get out of the way for them to just free them
Mhm.
up to operate, to the best of their abilities. And that kind of stuck like every place I went, like that frame of like find and remove friction. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that's such I want to say non-standard perspective. You know, um, I don't hear that nearly as often as I would like when I'm talking to people about how to get their people, how do you get your teams to operate better?
Well,
Yeah.
and I guess this is it's probably something we can dig into that because I mean it's the basis of our business.
Hmm.
Our methodology that we got recognized for last year is called Simplify to Amplify, and it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's made up of two pieces: friction removal and compound performance. And the
Right.
idea here is you've got all of these people who have been hired and are generally trying to do a pretty good job, with their stuff that's going on in their lives around them, but they're generally trying quite hard. They're coming to work each day, not just stealing a salary, but actually trying to make a difference. They care, they're quite passionate. And then they get dunked into this system that's full of treacle. And so they're swimming in treacle, decisions that take forever, lack of funding, lack of trust, lack of clarity, too many priorities, all these things that are going on. And they swim as hard as they can through the treacle until they get exhausted. And then they go, I don't care anymore. And then you end up with one of kind of three options, which is they check out, but they stay, keep, claiming a salary. They leave or they get promoted. And any one of those three is not necessarily helpful for your business. And
Right.
so
Right.
the treacle, the friction removal is essentially working out what's the treacle in the organization and getting rid of that. And we have obviously a diagnostic process that does that and it gives people a really comprehensive insight as to what are the priority causes of your friction that's slowing your business down. And then essentially it's like kind of people in a rowing boat all rowing in opposite directions at the same time. The boats that everybody's working really hard, but the boat's not going anywhere. And so we've got to get everybody facing in the same direction and rowing in time. And then performance starts to pick up. So then what we want to do is create what we call compound performance, which is kind of like compound interest. You put money in the bank and over time it grows and then it grows and then it grows. But the growth is on growth. Performance is the same. If you work on fixing what we call 1% items each day or each week or each month, over time, it kind of acts like a fishing dragnet that is pulling everything else along as well. And so performance compound improves. If you look at the research, it says 37.8x over a year if you do 1% every day. Now, 1% every day for the first few weeks is really easy. For the first couple of months, a little bit more challenging. After you get to kind of 6 months, and we've run this as research projects in organizations, after about 6 months, to try and find a 1% improvement in an operational process or in a supply chain or in a manufacturing organization or in a coding environment, um, is you have to kind of start pulling things apart and looking under the hood and looking a bit deeper, and it becomes really challenging. But every time you do it, there's like this significant compound improvement to performance again. So that's really, from my perspective, friction removal and compound performance are the two two targets that we want to try and achieve when we're working with leaders in organizations, and it's very pragmatic stuff. So
Right.
the goal here is the friction is not, oh, we haven't got a really comprehensive 5-year strategy. It's there's probably some strategy somewhere, but nobody really knows what's in it, and we're not following it, and it's just kind of put on the shelf. Or um, if only my boss would give me a really clear indication of what the priorities are this week, then I could focus on that. But I'm trying to focus on too many things because I'm not sure what the priority is, or everything's a priority, which means nothing's a priority,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
everything's a
Yeah.
priority. So these are the areas where we get under the hood and go, look, these are the challenges. Let's fix these for you, and your people will do their magic.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's so interesting as you're talking about that. I'm thinking y- y- the part of the getting your people aligned is you're giving them enough work, force ranked, and they understand the priorities. Um, and sometimes that means that, like, I've done a ton of product management. Means I've got to go back to stakeholders and go, you can't have all three of these things be number one priority. You only get to have one be number one priority. I don't care, you know, which one you guys decide. And and being able to have that conversation is the important factor in there. That where you're like, yeah, okay. Number one, I'm comfortable talking to the executives, and I feel psychologically safe. Number two, I know how to present this stuff in a way that they're going to pay attention and give me what I need. Right. So it's it's communication, construction, and style.
Hmm.
Um, and three, I got to be willing to go to bat for my team. You
Yep.
know, and that's the. I think that there's an underlying piece there of emotional resilience to be able to go, yeah, I'm going to go to bat for my team, and I'm going to go tell these three stakeholders that they don't get to have it this way. You know,
Yep.
and that's one of those not as widely adopted things. Is how do you build the emotional resilience?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Baby steps, 1% game.
right. Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
so interesting. We have this conversation quite frequently in the room when we do our Amplify program, where people say, oh my God, I've got so many priorities, and my boss isn't able to tell me which is a priority. It just seems everything's a priority all the time. And the my response is, well, you need to give your boss a recommendation with some risks attached to it, because your boss has your job times 4 to 7 to 10 times, because they're managing 4 to 7 to 10 of you across their portfolio, and they've got their own job to do. So they're even less clear and less focused on your bit than you are. So you're the expert. You need to go to them with a recommendation of, this is what we should stop. This is what we should slow down. This is what we should swap out. This is what we should delay, whatever it might be, with the risks and assumptions attached to that. So they can go, well, actually, your assumptions are wrong, and this is what I know that you don't know. Or, yes, I'm willing to wear those risks. You create shared accountability for the decisions that are being made, but you make a decision. The other one that's really interesting, though, that you mentioned is, I don't feel comfortable to do that with my boss. My boss won't hear me. And yes, there are bosses who are genuinely unreasonable in the world, who will just say, no, everything's a priority, all has to happen this week. But the majority of the time, when you actually pin them down and have that conversation, most people are quite reasonable. And you go, well, look, you can't have three. You've got to choose one. Tell me which is most important. And they will. But in our brains, we've got this narrative going on saying, my boss isn't going to like this. I'm going to look like a failure if I go in front of them and say, I don't know which is the priority. You need to tell me which is the priority. My boss is going to be unreasonable and demanding, so I'm not going to bother doing it. So I'll just work evenings and weekends to make sure it happens. And I learned this trick it's actually from a friend of mine who works in fire and emergency in New Zealand. What he does on a weekly basis is he goes with his list of things that he's working on, and he says, in the first minute, I'm going to read out all the things I'm working on. You tell me the three you want to hear about. And that immediately tells him what's the priorities right now for his boss. And they might change
Yeah.
on a weekly basis, but he knows. And then
Right.
he can go back to
Right.
his team and go, the boss is interested in X, Y, and Z. So we can slow down A, B, and C because they're not the crocodile closest to the canoe right now. They're not the priority right now in my boss's eyes. And we know an executive, things flux and change and switch all the time. But having that little check-in moment isn't a I can't do the job and I'm not good enough and I'm not worth the money you're paying me and I'm struggling under the workload. It's, hey, I want to be strategic about what I'm doing here and I want to focus on delivering the things you really need right now.
Right. Yeah. 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 And I think that's the getting people into that, like, what's the 1% to get them comfortable into that place? Um, and then how do they frame their communications to get what they need out of the boss, like to get them to actually go down that road of, okay, yeah, if push comes to shove, this is the most important thing. And
Yeah.
number two is gonna be this, you know, and and I think, yeah, I think that's such a it's interesting. I don't remember. Yeah, I do. I had one very horrible boss, and they did not want questions. Um, and I got seriously chewed out one day for going in and asking a question about something. And yeah, that was not a good day.
But on the balance of evidence, you said I had one really bad
Right,
boss out
right,
of how many bosses in your career, right?
right. Exactly. Yeah, I've had a bunch of them, and I think part of this. So the strategy that I've always taken is I'm a huge fan of back channel communication, and so I'm always talking to people um, from other teams in the organization to figure out their problems. What's their friction, right? And can my team help them? And because it doesn't make it through the org chart,
Yeah.
like it doesn't bubble up and they come back down to me. And so I go do the research and I find out stuff, figure out how to solve their problem, and then it gives me a better idea of how to think about framing that as a prioritization. Like, oh, yeah, I know you want me to build this thing, but actually, if we get this problem solved, that's going to unlock $20 million in revenue, and this one's only 500,000.
Yeah.
Like in my head, 20 million makes more sense, but maybe something I don't. And when I can, and by the way, Maria, who's responsible for that 20 million, um, would love for us to get this done, and here's how long it'll take. When you kind of go into that kind of data, it seems like it makes it way easier to have the conversation, number one, but also the executives, their decision making process becomes much, much easier for them. And so um they're not upset the next time you walk into their office,
No.
you know? And that's
And
one of
I
the
think you've
wins.
you've tapped into something really beautiful there, which is this idea of getting away from urgency and focusing on impact and value. It made me think of one of the frameworks that we teach is called the 3x3x3. And it's basically your weekly comms that goes out to your manager and or the leadership team that you sit in, which tells them 3 bullet points of what you've delivered and its impact or value on the business. 3 things you're focusing on next week and their impact or value to the business, and 3 things that you need from your boss or the leadership team and the impact or value on the business. And you'll notice I say impact and value 3 times there, but it's a really concise way of giving your boss, here's what we've done, here's what we're doing next week, and here's what I need from you, which gives them clarity. And again, if you think your boss has more clarity than you, They don't. Very simply, it's more ambiguous. It's more, there's more shades of gray. There's more complexity at every tier of an organization. And the job of a leadership team is to try and create enough clarity for the people underneath them to operate. But if they're not giving it to you, you can give it back to them. So giving them this 3 by 3 by 3 on a weekly basis, it positions you as strategic, because you have to think about, well, what are the three most important things we've done this week? We've probably done 50 things this week, but what are the three I really want my boss to know about? If you've been in your one-on-one with your boss the previous week and you said, what are the three you want to hear about? You know what the three most important things are. Have you done those three things? Cool. Brilliant. Next week, my focus is this. That gives my boss the opportunity to come back to me and say, actually, can you slot this one on instead? So they've got to, check and adjust. Also, your boss should be able to see, this has been on your to-do list for the last 4 weeks. Why are you not getting to it? Well, because I'm overwhelmed with these 55 things. Well, let's have a look at that then. And then what do I need from you? Could be an approval, a sign off, endorsement of risks and assumptions, whatever it might be. But it gives your boss again clarity on, what do I need to do as a boss to make this person happy and keep them engaged? There's no reason why if you're sitting in like the middle management layer or the junior management layer, you can have your team on a weekly basis send those to you. You aggregate them, assimilate them, whatever the word is, and then you send them up to your boss based on your weekly report. We install this system into organizations, and immediately things like clarity, ambiguity, trust, performance all start to shift, because you've got some way, a very simple way of just measuring this stuff out. That means that your boss isn't plucking straws out of thin air trying to go, well, what should we be focusing on? I don't really know, so I'll just choose some
Right,
arbitrary
right.
items.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking like, oh, the stuff you're talking about, I've just been doing automatically, and I didn't think because like years ago, somebody made a comment that being a product manager is kind of like running your own business, because
Hmm.
you have to force rank and prioritize and research and I always I think because of being at startups, most of my career has been at startups or smaller businesses. The revenue impact has always been the first thing in my head anyway, is, oh, how is this going to help the sales team make more sales?
Hmm.
We're building this thing, they're going to make more sales. And especially when you're an early stage startup and you're thinking, okay, we need to make sales so that we are profitable before we run out of our seed funding. It puts a whole other level of perspective on it. And I think that it also well, there's no politics.
Hmm.
So yeah, I like that. That makes sense. Um, do you see differences in implementation based on industry for when you're thinking about this?
Um, yes and no, I would say, which probably doesn't answer your question perfectly, but I'll expand on that. Um, People tend to be people wherever you go, and one of the things that I've noticed as the years have gone on is working across probably 7 or 8 different industries on a regular basis, is that the challenges are pretty consistent. So much so that we built a 6-week program that was the sort of 6 things that 90% of managers are struggling with, that overwhelm them, and we can fix them. And we don't need to alter that depending on if they come from construction or software or FMCG, because generally those 6 things are pretty similar. Um, what I would say is that there are implementation in cultural or regional environments can be very, very different. So if we're
Mm,
working in Asia, or if we're working in Europe, it's very different to a North American audience or a Kiwi audience. The way you engage, the way we facilitate, the way we share is markedly different. And some of the theoretical models that you would want to um, assume based on, I grew up in the UK. So the UK societal theoretical model of how people interact with their leaders, very different in Asia, very different in the US. So I think the challenges that leaders are facing now, which is, in very simple terms, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity,
Mhm.
um, are almost ubiquitous. The way that they deal with them and the way that you can help them is very different. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah, it does. The cultural thing is the one that, that stands out for me, is like and, uh, I guess maybe software is an unusual world because I've worked with folks all over the planet, um, over the years, and maybe because I wasn't concerned so much about, um I wasn't concerned about politics of communication, and I was only concerned about, how do we help the company run better and make more money?
Yeah.
It made it very it made the conversation super cut and dried, you know?
Mhm.
Um, I mean, at least it felt very cut and dried to me, right? And so, it was like, I've got all these resources. What do you wanna build first? You know?
Yeah.
Or what 2 things do you want us to build in parallel, um, but we can't do 10,
Hmm.
There's I've only got so many people, so many teams, um
So many sets of fingers that you can be typing on the coding.
Yeah, right, and, sometimes it's, "Oh, well, team A has to finish before team B can start."
Hmm.
You got some like, "Okay, we've gotta have all the data in the database before somebody can be actually pulling stuff out and showing it to somebody." It's a um But yeah, that I just I never feel like I ran into any significant globally cultural friction, um, because I kinda carried my own set of blinders with me, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and I don't and I know that in other contexts, that's not always the case. I just got super lucky, I think, in that realm. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah. Um, what other kinds of friction do you see organizations have?
Oof.
Like you said, there
We've
were
identified, yeah, we've identified 43 of them so far. Um,
43.
with
Wow, okay.
43, yeah. So I won't go through all of them. The really common ones, uh, lack of trust. So
Yeah.
I
Yep.
don't trust the people around me to do the job. I don't trust the people above me to protect me, promote me, develop me, engage me, to have my back. And if I take them bad news, they'll shoot me. So I don't trust them, and I don't trust my team either because they're new or they're overloaded or they're not skilled enough yet or they're not as good as I was when I was doing that job. Multiple sort of instances, but trust is a really really big one in teams that they don't have an understanding of how much do I trust or not trust this person, and how do I build trust with the people around me. It's trust is kind of a nebulous concept. You know if you don't trust somebody or do trust them, but not many people understand how do you go about building trust other than doing what you said you were going to do and being honest. And it's been fascinating to me as I've worked in Latin America more that trust is asked for and demanded as a concept, whereas in the UK, where I grew up, for example, trust is earned. So
Right.
it's really interesting how the sort of, again, the cultural nuance is different. That they'll say here, you should trust me. Um, which to them is like, well, I'm trustworthy, so you should trust me. But it doesn't, in my brain, that doesn't compute because like I grew up in an environment where like, well, I'll make that decision. Thanks. You can't tell me to trust you.
Right,
So
right,
we teach a methodology of how do I assess the deepness of the trust I've got, and how do I then go about deepening it through a series of again practical activities.
right, right.
So that's a very common one. Another one that we see is lack of clarity on what my role is meant to be doing. So,
Oh, ouch. Yeah.
what very simple example. I work with a company that creates high end kitchens for domestic and commercial installations, and they have a team of about 15 odd people. And the managing director of the business was getting like 80, 90 phone calls a day with small questions, the interruptions, basically. Can I do this? This is broken. What should I do about this? What do you think? How should this organize? How do I organize this? And one of the frameworks that we teach is called the roles framework. But the L in roles stands for leadership, limits, and latitude. And
Mm,
so this was just a clarifying conversation that he could have with each member of his team, and he could set a threshold. If it costs less than £100 to fix it, just fix it. Just keep a log of what you've fixed. Or, if fixing it's going to save us all 10 minutes, just fix it. So you create this sense of ownership and clarity for somebody to say, well, I can make a decision on that on my own. I don't need to go to my boss about it.
right,
Just
right,
by doing a very, very simple thing, which is here is your leadership limits. You can make a decision up to this point, and latitude. You've got all of this area where you're free to basically work out how to sail the ship as fast as you can. And and that is really empowering. If you go back to sort of Dan Pink's research on drive, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Purpose, I know why I'm doing it and what difference it's making. Autonomy, I'm allowed to drive the boat. And people like to drive the boat because it's fun, as opposed to somebody saying every time anything happens, no, step out of the way, I'll take over now and I'll deal with it for you. So this clarity conversation that we create doing the roles framework makes them really, really clear on what they're responsible for. I want you to go deliver this. Here's the outcomes that I want you to create. Here's your leadership limits and latitude, what you can and can't make decisions on. Here's the experience, exposure, and education I want you to go get to keep growing and developing in this role. Here's the gaps that you've got to fill. And here's the support that's available to you. And when people have clarity on that, performance dramatically shifts. The
right.
one
Yeah,
the piece of it, the center, the L in the roles framework I think is the clincher. It's that what am I allowed to do, and what
right.
am I not allowed to do? That gives me clarity.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's good, and it's such a you mentioned ownership, and that's always um such a huge piece, I find, is that when people have ownership of the whatever, right, product, then they're much more intrinsically motivated,
Mhm.
and I always wanna see that because people do better work, and they're happier when they're intrinsically motivated, and I'm a huge
100%.
fan of happy people, you know? Um,
But
when you're talking
if I think back to a workshop I did probably 3-4 weeks ago now, um, and we asked the explicit question: when was the last time you told somebody what they owned in your team? And people are like, well, you kind of implicitly, I think I've told them this, but have you actually said, this is yours? You own this. You are responsible for the outcomes.
yeah,
And often we think we have as managers, but we haven't, which is
right.
why we have the roles conversation.
Yeah, and people don't if you say it once, they don't hear it. You gotta say
No,
it over and over and over, and the repetition is such an important part of that communication stack that that and I think, people are like, "Oh, I shouldn't have to repeat myself twice." No, you actually should repeat yourself 20 times, like,
yeah,
every
at least.
day, Yeah, and then people finally they'll trust that you mean it. Back to
Yeah.
trust again. Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
as a
a
leader, your actions have to reinforce those words. So
right.
very simple example. You're responsible for this customer and growing the revenue that's coming from this customer. Um, until something goes wrong, when I'll step in and take over and do it all for you to maintain the relationship. Well, immediately you've said you don't own this anymore. You're
Right.
just a
Right.
caretaker until there's a higher consequence that needs my attention. And this is what happens so often in organizations is you get the senior manager or the big boss swoops in to save the day because the
Yeah.
client is on the rocks versus backstopping the person who owns the relationship saying, okay, I'm here as a tool for you. What do you need from me for us to get this back on track? And
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
person to be able to say, well, actually, if you could meet with them, that'd be great. Or can you come to the meeting with me? Or, can you give me some advice? That's the role a leader should play, which is in essentially is allowing your people to perform. But if your actions are contrary to your words, you own this, but I'll fix it every time it goes wrong. Then the trust is again dissuaded.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's a very good perspective, and it's very empowering for the employees. And you know, that's the win. I think one of the frames that I learned from a very early mentor of mine around leadership was that I should be thinking of my role in the team as they're my leverage, and that team can do multiples more of whatever it is that we happen to be doing, in my case, coding. They can code a whole lot more than I can code by myself, and I really need to foster and facilitate that uh, rather than trying to really control it. And so I thought that was I was like, oh, well, in that case, you know, take all the friction away that I possibly can, let the reins go. These horses are like going really fast, all in the right direction. We're very happy. Yeah. Yeah. That was a good one. This has been
Absolutely.
awesome. Yeah. It's super helpful. Um, any other words of advice you can think of for like budding team leads?
I think one of the hardest parts of becoming a team leader is when you step up out of a team into being the team leader. And we think we've got to have it all together. We think we've got to be we're suddenly with the boss, and we've got to tell people what to do, and we've got to organize the work schedule, and we've got to, have everything under control. And the reality of authentic leadership is we're all just pretending to adult and hoping nobody finds out. And what we see through research around imposter syndrome is that we all have two jobs. There's the job we're paid to do, and then there's the job of pretending we're doing our job better than we actually are. Um, and that takes a lot of intellectual horsepower. And so if you're moving into a team lead role or you are in a team lead role, you do not need to be the expert in everything. You may have been promoted because you were the best coder or the best software developer or whatever it might be, but that's not your job anymore. Your job now is to create a group of coders and software engineers or whatever it might be that are outperforming all the other teams. So if you look at your role as, okay, boys and girls, how are we going to do this? And asking more questions and seeking their advice, you will become much more engaging as a team leader than you trying to know it all, you trying to be across everything. Much better when somebody asks you a question, say, let me go and pull my lead from that area into the room so I can get their knowledge on it. Involve them, ask them.
Yeah.
They are your source of wisdom and experience. And while the training wheels are on to become a team leader, and as you go up through the organization, you always got your training wheels on. You're always looking to the people who are doing the job with the experience, who can be your sounding board before you go back and present the answer. And if I go back to my military days, as a junior officer, second lieutenant, you're paired with a senior sergeant and a staff sergeant, and they are your mentors. I officially I outrank them, but everything that we would do, I go, "What do you think? What do you think we should do?" And they would go, "Well, I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't do this, and I would try that, and we've tried this before." My job is to make the decision. Okay, based on everything I've heard, this is what I think we should do. Are we agreed? No, let's tweak, tweak, tweak. Okay, based on that now, this is what I think we should do. Are we agreed? Yes. Right, now let's go and tell everybody what we're going to do. But if you try and do that in isolation, chances are that you're going to stumble and then you undermine your own position as a team leader fairly quickly.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, that getting the input and the collaboration part, I'm a gigantic fan of that. Yeah. One of the things that I learned early on was I uh I don't want to ever come across as this as I don't want to come across as anybody thinking that I think I'm the smartest person in the room, even if I am. I really um I don't want to be the pistons. I want to be the oil.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I think about it is, lubricating everything so it works really, really well. Um which is, it's a job in and of itself. And you just got to recognize that when you're promoted from piston roll to oil roll, it's a whole new game. So,
Hmm.
yeah. I just thought of that analogy as you were talking. It like popped in. Somehow, whatever you said triggered that. I'm like, oh, piston, oil. Yeah. And you didn't say anything
Friction
automotive.
removal, you see?
Yeah. 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 Friction removal. Exactly. Yeah. Totally friction removal. Yeah. Yeah. So it's awesome. This has been super cool. Thank you a ton. I appreciate it.